In the dustiest corner of the attic, it sat, a relic from another time, a Marconi Model R, its wooden cabinet warped and its fabric grille frayed. It hadn't been plugged in for decades. My grandfather brought it back from the war, a trophy, or perhaps a ghost he couldn't leave behind. It never worked, not once in my memory. It was just part of the house's furniture, a silent witness to generations passing, until last Tuesday. The house was still, wrapped in the profound silence that only comes after midnight. I was downstairs, reading, when a sound pricked the quiet, a low hum, almost subliminal. I thought it was the refrigerator, or maybe the pipes settling. But then it grew, a crackle of static that crawled down the stairs and into the living room. It was coming from the attic. My heart began to beat a little faster. An old house makes noises, I told myself. It's just the wind. But this wasn't the wind. This was electric. I crept up the stairs, each step groaning under my weight. The attic door was ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me. The static grew louder, a hiss like 1,000 whispering insects. There it was, the old radio. A faint, sickly yellow light pulsed from behind its dial, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was impossible. There were no batteries, no cord running to an outlet. It was a dead thing, a wooden box, but it was alive. The static swirled, a chaotic sea of noise. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hand gripping the frame. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A stray signal, some bizarre atmospheric phenomenon. But the rational part of my brain was being drowned out by a primal fear. Then, through the blizzard of static, a voice began to emerge. It was faint at first, a murmur buried deep within the noise. I strained to hear, stepping closer. The voice was male, rasped and dry, like someone who hadn't had a drink in years. It spoke my name. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He said my name as if he knew me, as if we'd spoken 1,000 times before. I backed away, stumbling over a box of old photographs. The voice continued, its tone calm, conversational, which was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "You always did hate the dark, didn't you?" it said. "Even as a boy, crying for your mother to leave the hall light on. How could it know that? A memory so deeply buried, so personal." The static swelled again, and the voice shifted. Suddenly, it was speaking German, the words harsh and guttural. I don't speak German, but the tone was unmistakable. It was angry, accusatory. The light behind the dial flickered, and the language changed again. French this time. The voice became smooth, almost seductive, but with an undercurrent of menace. It spoke of a locket, a small silver heart I'd lost as a teenager. It described the scratch on the back, a detail I had forgotten myself. It knew everything. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a signal. This was an intelligence, something ancient and knowing, broadcasting directly into my home, using this dead object as its mouthpiece. The voice switched to Russian, then to a language I didn't recognize, full of clicks and sharp consonants that sounded alien. inhuman. With each new language, the feeling of dread intensified. It was as if I was listening to a chorus of ghosts, all trapped within that wooden box, all fighting to speak through one throat. The voice then returned to English, but it was different now. It was no longer calm. It was filled with a desperate, pleading urgency. "I didn't mean to," it rasped, the words tumbling over each other. The fog was so thick on the road, I couldn't see. The headlights, they just appeared. It sounded like a confession, a dark secret being ripped from the ether. Her eyes, she looked right at me before the impact. My own breath hitched in my throat. I felt like an intruder, an unwilling priest in a confessional for the damned. Who was this? What was this? The voice grew more frantic, describing a scene of twisted metal and broken glass. It spoke of a promise made and a promise broken. It spoke of running, of hiding, of a guilt that festered for a lifetime. "They never found me," the voice sobbed, the sound distorted by the static. "But it doesn't matter. You can't run from what's inside you. It follows. It always follows." The yellow light on the dial began to pulse faster, brighter. The static crackled with violent energy. Then the confession ended. The pleading stopped. It was replaced by a new sound, a low guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. It wasn't human. The voice deepened, contorting into something monstrous. "He's here," it whispered, the words dripping with pure terror. "He found me." What followed was not a word, not a language, but a scream. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, of a soul being torn apart. It ripped through the static, so loud, so visceral, that I clapped my hands over my ears, but it did nothing to block it out. It was inside my head. The scream went on and on, a continuous shriek of torment that seemed to have no end. I scrambled for the radio, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I had to turn it off. I fumbled for the knob, the same knob that had been frozen with rust for 60 years. It wouldn't budge. I pulled, I twisted, I slammed my fist against the cabinet, but the screaming only grew louder, more piercing. I grabbed the radio, intending to smash it, to throw it out the window, to silence it by any means necessary. But as my fingers closed around the wood, a shock, cold and vile, shot up my arm. It wasn't electricity, it was something else. A feeling of profound loss, of endless regret, of an eternity spent in darkness. I let go, crying out, my hand numb and tingling. I ran. I fled the attic, tumbled down the stairs, and burst out of my front door into the cold night air, gasping for breath. The screaming followed me. I could still hear it, echoing from the top floor of my house. Days have passed. I haven't been back inside. I've been sleeping in my car, parked down the street. From here, I can see the attic window, and every night, just after midnight, a faint, sickly yellow light begins to glow. The sound is faint from this distance, but I can still hear it, a constant, low hiss of static. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I can hear the screaming. The police won't go in. They called it a faulty wiring issue, a prank, but there is no wiring. The real estate agent says the house is unsellable now. No one can enter. The moment you step inside, the sound is overwhelming. The radio in the attic is always on. It can't be unplugged. It can't be destroyed. And it can never, ever be turned off. It just sits there in the dark, broadcasting its eternal confession, waiting for someone else to listen.